is a French organisation called Ce qui le patron. Now, its origins lie in 2015 when one of its two co-founders, Nicolas Chaban, was looking at the French milk market. And he quickly realized that with every litre of milk that French farmers were selling, they were making a loss. It was driving them to bankruptcy. And in fact, there was a whole wave of suicides going on amongst French farmers as well. He also calculated, by the way, that it would only take an 8-cent uplift in price in the supermarkets to turn the milk into something that could, farmers could get a sustainable living from. That equates to about €4 per year per customer on what they spend in milk. So, about a year later, he was joined by Laurent Pasquier. By 2016, they had milk on shelves in supermarkets. Since then, they have launched over 30 products. They are expanding to 9 countries. They are actually France's biggest, fastest ever growing new food brand. And they're coming to the UK as well, which is exciting. Now, let's have a think about the practices of these two companies. Now, the shift in practices that I think we need to go through, as you see here, is around, this is where Macs don't recognize stuff that happens on PCs. That little square is an arrow, just for the duration of this presentation. Is a shift of kind of, maximizing for the present. We need to think about how do we regenerate for the future. Now, both of these companies have some exciting practices that they do, which conform, I think, to the kind of regenerating the future. So, Brewdog is a B Corp, has a score of 81.8. It also, excitingly, kind of says it brews the world's first carbon-negative beer, and it says it puts employees at the heart of its business and distributes 10% of profits to them. Ce qui le patron also has some very interesting kind of mechanisms. So one is that they want to, that part of their purpose is really to kind of provide farmers with a livable kind of income. So it's almost like a kind of local or national fair trade equivalent. And interestingly, they also co-create their products with their consumers. So when they kind of went out to develop this milk that they were going to sell, what they actually did was they ran a whole bunch of, they ran a big survey filled in by thousands of people asking them, should this milk be organic? Should it be free range? How long should the cows be in pasture? Should they be allowed to eat any genetically modified organisms? How local should the farmers be to the supermarkets that their milk gets sold in eventually? And fascinatingly, what price will this milk be sold at? Which, if you just think about it for a minute, given that they want to make sure the farmers get a fair price and can live from it, is an interesting thing to kind of give away control over. So both of them, I think, have fascinating practices that we can say are about regenerating the future, maintaining, be that carbon-negative beer, I think obvious, or making sure that we have a kind of agricultural industry that can actually make a living is also important to that. So difficult to keep apart. Is one of them dangerously incremental? Is the other one exponentially transformational? Don't know yet. Let's look, therefore, at the next shift that I think needs to happen. Shall I admit that person?
Just click on the screen.
Yeah. The next shift that needs to happen is about purpose. This shift is all about going from essentially just trying to benefit yourself, and I'm talking about an individual or an organisation, or a country for that matter, versus working for the whole. How do we keep? What's my role in keeping the wider whole, the wider system healthy, if you like? Now, organisationally, there's some kind of fairly obvious examples that we can have here, where we see a real difference in approach. Total Energies, their mission, according to their website, is to meet the demand for oil products worldwide. You kind of think that's probably because they want to do that so they can sell lots of oil, which creates lots of revenue, which maximizes their profits. That is about maximizing for yourself, or in maybe slightly more psychological speak, about self-actualization. Interestingly, just admitting the next person, interestingly, if we look at BP's new purpose statement, I think this is really fascinating. Whatever you think about oil companies in general, but they have a statement in there, which is, as they say, they want to help the world reach net zero. It doesn't say it here, but it says it further down by 2050. I think if BP had come out and said, by 2050, we as an organisation want to be net zero, I think we'd all go, oh, that's quite impressive for an oil company. But they've not stopped there. They have gone beyond themselves and thought about what in the world, what is our role in that wider system? How do we help the world become net zero? How do we help the world be healthy? Now, I'm not making any comment about what BP is actually doing and whether they're fulfilling that purpose or not. They are doing lots of stuff which is antithetical to this, I'm sure. But at least in terms of this statement, they clearly have some people who have the vision to kind of see beyond themselves and have that slightly more self-transcendent view of the world, which is, I think, part of the shift that we need to go for first. Second example, in the chocolate industry, Hershey. I'm cheating here slightly because, frankly, this is slightly out of date. I think it's not their current mission statement, but it's their last mission statement. Undisputed market leadership. Well, why? Well, clearly, because I want to dominate that market. That will allow me to, not only maximize my profits, but also probably manipulate the price and all the rest of it, and we know why that is. Versus Divine is all about how do I have a positive influence on the cocoa industry that I'm part of and the farmers that are also part of it. So, how does that look for our two companies, Brewdog and C'est Le Patron? Well, Brewdog says that their mission is to make everyone as passionate about craft beer as they are themselves. Sounds okay. C'est Le Patron doesn't actually have an explicit purpose or mission statement on their website, but I think it's fair to infer that it's about helping consumers, co-create, design the products that they actually need, and then sourcing those in a sustainable and ethical way. Now you could say, well, that second one clearly sounds a bit more self-transcendent, but I think it's also fair to say there's nothing wrong about being passionate about the product that you create and wanting to make your consumers become passionate and your customers become passionate about it as well. I think that's fair enough for a lot of things. So still, maybe not that easy to kind of drive a wedge between those or distinguish on these two lenses that we've had so far, of practices and purpose. So let's go one further. Let's think about people. Let's think about our attitude that we have to people. Now, Frederick Taylor, who many of you may have heard of, has a lot to answer for in this area. Frederick Taylor was an industrialist, inventor, credited with being the first management consultant at the beginning of the 20th century. Actually talked in very systemic terms, talked about organizations being systems, needing to optimize those systems, and so on and so forth. And he kind of, his thing was scientific management and becoming much clearer, much more rigorous, much more process-driven about how we're going to run organizations. And then, again, actually nothing wrong with that necessarily. But for some reason, he had a very dim view of humanity. So this is a quote from him, which I'll let you read. But for some reason, he thinks that all his colleagues are out to diddle him, or out to diddle the company, I suppose. If they can be really lazy, they're gonna try their hardest to be really lazy and just get paid for not doing anything. And for some reason, and maybe sadly, this has been massively influential. It was kind of, you can see it gets picked up in neoliberal management theory as well, where neoliberal management theory and economic theory basically believes that humans are, kind of failed. No, they're not well-intentioned. They are bad. They are self-interested. They are greedy. They are out for themselves. And you see that, I think, in the whole kind of performance management industry and palaver that we have. Setting targets, monitoring those targets, quantifying stuff, ensuring that you have consequences for whether you reach your targets or not. These are all actually forms of control. These are all forms of controlling, what we believe must be bad tendencies that humans have. The same, by the way, is in a slightly higher level, and what economists get their knickers in a twist about as well, with the principal agent problem, which I'm sure you've heard about. Principal owners of the company's agent, the CEO or the senior management, and they're obsessed by the fact that surely the senior management is going to try and do not what's in the interest of the company, but they're just going to try and enrich themselves and so on and so forth. And that's where the whole idea of quarterly reporting comes from, because we have to monitor them. We're going to give them stock options so they're incentivized along the way. these things have all kinds of unintended consequences then, that all come out of this idea that we think humans are essentially bad and we need to control their unhelpful tendencies. So, this shift is all about needing to go from thinking of humans as resources that we need to control to thinking as humans as someone that we can relate to as a human being. And that actually probably someone who probably actually has good intentions, and is trying to do the right thing. So what does this look like in our two companies again? So Ce qui le patron, actually, to be fair, I don't know what it looks like internally, but I think we can infer from how they treat their suppliers, in quite a fair way, how they treat their consumers in a very adult way, giving them lots of trust and responsibility to make really quite big decisions. I assume that probably is an indicator for how they work inside as well. So how does it work, just admitting the next person here, at BrewDog then? And those of you who've been following the story probably know that this is where some disappointment started creeping in. In the middle of last year, there was a big open letter. It's all sorted. Thank you very much.
So sorry.
That's okay, no problems. Big open letter signed by about 60 former employees, apparently supported by tens more former employees and current employees. Blowing the whistle essentially on the internal culture at BrewDog. And just to give you a couple of quotes, one of them is that there is a culture of fear, which is clearly a mechanism of control in an organization like this. And the second one is actually, they quite explicitly said, we were not treated as human beings. You did not relate to us as fellow human beings. So this is where I think we start seeing the kind of difference in the two organizations. But we had to kind of go quite deep. We have to go past what we see, the practices that we see on the surface. And it's interesting to me to think about, well, why is this so different? We had in the practices, I told you, this is on the website, that BrewDog puts employees at the heart of its business and distributes 10% of profits to them. They seem to do all these things, which are great. How does this come out? It doesn't make sense. Well, I think then, we come to the heart of the matter, which is to make it appeal, obviously, paradigm, but I often talk about the values or the beliefs that we hold. If we root our organization in particular beliefs, this is the kind of thing that can happen. And as you know, from the beliefs and the values and the paradigm will emerge, ultimately, the practices. So we can look at BrewDog again and hear a couple more quotes from their open letter. The first is, well, actually, you claim to be very environmentally, but first, carbon negative beer, but you also hire private jets to jet across the Atlantic, and then you realize you don't have enough people to justify it, so you can pile in a whole bunch more employees just to kind of make the money look okay, and it just doesn't feel quite authentic, I suppose, is the current word. Or maybe most tellingly, that the real purpose of why we were here is actually growth. And this is obviously associated with that kind of fundamental value that a lot of our economic and management thinking is based on, is that actually we're trying to grow. And this is underpinned and supported by the fact that when you find out that in 2017 they sold 22% of their business to a private equity company. If you sell to a private equity company, of course, everything in the run-up to that sale is going to be about growth. Of course, the private equity company is going to ensure that everything after the sale is going to be about growth as well. And maybe, or this is just the kind of sting in the tail, I thought that that deal was apparently worth £213 million. That's what the private equity company put in. £100 million of that, so almost half, basically paid off the two founders. So you get £200 million in a deal. You say, well, I'm actually only going to put half of that into the business. I'm going to take the rest of the half of that for myself. That kind of feels, again, to me, very much like benefiting from myself rather than thinking about what is the need of the greater whole, maybe in this case, the organization that needs it. Contrast that with Ce qui le patron, they have a bunch of values on their website, which which actually I probably believe that they do live. It's about solidarity, it's about transparency, verifiability, and so on. That's all fine. But what I'm actually really interested in their case are what I call the kind of countercultural values that they display. So they do two things, which you know, if you kind of come, if you've been to MBA school or something, you can go, this doesn't make sense at all. The first is, I had a conversation with their FD and I said, well, you know, who are your consumers? How do you segment them? I'm kind of curious to know because we don't know. I said, well, what do you mean you don't know? You must have done some market research. No, we don't do market research. We don't believe in marketing. So what do you mean you don't believe in marketing? Like you must, like, why not? Well, you know, actually we could kind of go and do a lot of market research on our consumers, segment them or whatever, but actually all that's going to do is it's going to tell us what product we need to launch next, that we can charge the highest price for, that people are going to want, maybe not need, you know, and that's going to be successful. That's not actually what we're trying to do. So we don't believe in that way of doing business. So what we do is we just have an open survey at any one time and get people to vote for what is the next product that they need. We want them to tell us. We don't want to kind of, in any way, in a marketing way, manipulate what that next product is be. So they all vote on, you know, after milk, do they want eggs, do they want flour, do they want, you know, whatever it might be. And that is we think that way we're actually going to discover much more carefully what do our consumers actually need, rather than what is it that we can most easily sell to them. So they don't believe in marketing. I think that's a really interesting kind of countercultural values they have. The second one, which we've really already covered, is this idea that they let their consumers vote. And they are tied by these votes then, as to, you know, what the characteristics of their products should be, including what the price will be. So if I was to kind of package it up and say, you know, what is the value behind that? They not only believe in the wisdom of the crowd, which, you know, maybe now quite a lot of people do, they also believe that the wisdom of the crowd is ethical. That is profoundly countercultural to how we are taught, you know, organizations should behave, we as individuals behave, or, you know, economics happens. We are taught that we are all going to maximize our self-interest. And so we will, of course, push that price down as far as we possibly can. They have gone, well, actually, I don't believe that. I think if you provide people with the right information, enough information, they will make, in inverted commas, the right choice that enables the farmers to, you know, earn a decent living from the price that we pay in supermarkets. And fascinatingly, a few weeks ago, this probably is a first, their consumers actually voted to increase the price of milk. They said, you know, it's a cost of living crisis. Okay, we've all got less money, but frankly, the input costs for the farmers have gone up. The farmers can't make a decent living out of the price of milk. We should pay more. That is profoundly countercultural and is a value which I think is really fascinating. Now, why is this important? Well, it's because, of course, the practices emerge from the values and the paradigm that they're rooted in. So, and where I'm really excited is not about, you know, I don't know which values are right or wrong, but I think it's really important and really necessary to have different values and experiment with countercultural ones. If we only ever, you know, if our innovation only stays within the same set of values and beliefs that we already have, we're never going to get to those transformative breakthroughs. If you'll forgive for a minute a kind of geometric analogy, if our current system, our heritage system is in the XY plane, and the only thing we ever experiment with is the x-axis and the y-axis, we might get further and further away from zero. You know, we might incrementally get further and further away from that, but we're never going to create transformative, genuine change. The only way we're going to create something really different in 3 dimensions is if we mix in a little bit of the z-axis as well. And this is where I think the countercultural, the counter-ideological, the weird values come in useful. And we don't know which ones of those are right, but we've got to start experimenting with them to find out which ones might be helpful. Now, this whole thing implies for me also a kind of new approach to leadership. This is kind of the second, I guess, big point of this morning. historically, you know, our kind of traditional view of leadership is that leaders are all about defining reality, defining the now, you know, what is it now? What is the situation we are in now? Secondly, they then need to design the future. What is the current state that we're wanting to go to? You'll know this from all kinds of change management projects and so on that you've been in, I'm sure. And then we develop the plan as how we're going to get from here to the future that we've designed. And ideally, I need to be really good at executing that plan as well. Now, that is an old style of leadership, and for all of you who understand anything about complex systems, you will probably realize that this just doesn't work, because you cannot design, you cannot foresee, you cannot predict what the future is going to look like in a complex system. You don't know how it's going to react to the intervention that you make. So it might work for some simple systems, but in the complex systems that we are increasingly operating in, and that are increasingly important ones, it's just not fit for purpose anymore. So I would like to propose that there's a different way, think of a square as an arrow again, outside the box. There's a different way of thinking about leadership. The first is that I think we need to experiment, and I've written here based on trust. And I mean this in the sense of we need to trust that doing things differently with a different set of values and beliefs is what is needed. We are not going to be able to prove that this is going to be any better, because this may lead, hopefully, to some changes from which a new system and a better system then can emerge. But we're not going to be able to prove to the current system that it works. So we need to, at some level, trust that we need to do things differently. We do then, however, need to be able to, I think, evaluate those experiments against a vision. Whilst we can't design what the future is going to look like in detail, I think we do have an obligation or responsibility. We were talking about this in the panel earlier. We do have an obligation to have an idea of what it is that we're trying to move towards, and maybe an idea of some characteristics or principles of what it ought to conform to. So, and that needs to provide to us some kind of way of evaluating whether the experiments are going in the right direction or whether they're going in a direction that is not very helpful. And then thirdly, when we've figured out what the experiments are and which ones are working, we need to be able to amplify those and be courageous about it, and not be frightened that we're going to be labelled as naive, not be frightened that we're going to be that's sort of very well, but the real world works like this. Actually, no, that's rubbish. This is actually how the real world works. And we need to be willing to shout about that. We need to make that mainstream. We need to build the credibility. We need to make people realise that these experiments, which often feel like actually what I would like to be true, actually are the ones that need to be true, and actually are the far more rational thing to be doing as well. And that, by the way, is not just about what works. We also need to be willing to talk about and amplify the experiments that don't work as well, so that we can collectively learn from them.
Amplify is my current favourite new word.
Good, yeah. Well, you see, it didn't
amplify is amazing.
It didn't work. I mean, ex-management consultant, it just has to start with the same letter. But anyway, we got it. Close.
It's a concept I've never thought of before.
Yeah. There you go. Good. The good news is that these experiments, we don't have to create these experiments. These experiments are happening all around us already. There are hundreds, there are thousands of organisations that are working in profoundly counter-ideological, counter-cultural ways, like Ce qui le patron. They will be doing, maybe it's only one thing that they do, but they do it in a really different way. And in so doing, they are proving that it is possible to run organisations and to do business differently. So actually what we need to do, we don't even have to have all that many skills in creating things, but we do have to have skills in recognising them. Wouldn't it be amazing if we all had a kind of set of augmented reality glasses, which rather than telling you that, oh, I can buy that cup on Amazon for £2.50, told you, oh, that organisation there is really weird and interesting because it does this specific thing different, and it's based on the fact that they believe something really different about how they interact with people, or whatever it might be. Wouldn't that be really powerful? We all went through life being able to see that much more clearly. Now, there is a twist in the BrewDog story. Literally last week, they announced that they are giving 5% of equity away to all their employees. Apparently, according to one article, this is worth £120,000 per employee over 4 years. I mean, that slightly boggles the mind. It's a very life-changing amount of money. And they're also, by the way, for the teams that work at pubs, announced this as a kind of first in the hospitality industry, they're going to get 50% of the profits that those pubs earn. So question, does that move BrewDog from being dangerously incremental to being transformatively exponential? Trick question. All I told you about is 2 practices that they have changed. If we want to really know whether it has the potential to be transformative, we would need to know, have those practices come out of a genuine change in values? And it might have been, maybe they took this open letter really to heart and went, actually we need to change how we run this business, and this is a first manifestation of that. Or is it maybe another roll of the dice of how I can just kind of keep it going and incrementally, throw more money at it, which allow me ultimately still to have an even higher growth and more lucrative business. I don't know which of those 2 it is, and maybe time will tell. But I just want to end on the idea that I believe that if we can become much, much better at seeing and understanding where these shifts are happening, we can kind of all develop these augmented reality glasses that we need to have, then with apologies to Dickens, I genuinely think we could be creating the best of times together. So thank you very much.
Let's have a little discussion about 15 minutes left. Musicians practice thank you. Thank you for the really interesting presentation. I like the amazing opportunity with previous places and reviews. So I'm just very curious about what you do. So vision sounds big picture, emotional, punchy, short, hard to get down. Evaluation could be reverse of that. This could be sharp and how do you go about doing more people to get to know you? It's like, it's actually really fascinating that what exactly is actually evaluating institution. How do you do that?
Yeah, so thank you for the question. It might be that the words are getting in the way of what I'm wanting them to say. So what I mean by that is that I think we need a way of identifying whether something's heading in the right direction. That's really what it's about. And I use the word vision because I think it's not about having a detailed plan of what it needs to look like in the future, but it's about having an idea of the type of economy or organization, in this case, depending on which level you're about, that we want to be getting towards. And so that, for me, is at the level of kind of different principles that we might be able to identify, maybe different values. I've done quite a lot of, reading into the idea of something called what I call healthy systems thinking. We can distill from understanding a very broad range of systems actually what characteristics and behaviours of healthy systems are. How to, in general, whether they're human-made or natural systems or whatever, ongoing, long-lasting, enduring systems that are therefore healthy, behave in certain ways. And that, for example, I think gives us a set of principles against which to kind of evaluate, if you like, whether we're heading in the right direction. But it's at that kind of, you've got to hold it quite lightly, because the whole point is that, of course, well, hopefully what happens is that if we manage to change the paradigm, stuff will emerge that at the moment we can't really conceive of, and will create the future that we need.
Yeah, that was a bit very interesting.
we're ultimately trying to get at what's a healthy organisation, really, aren't we? That's the underlying thing. And these are these principles. And then how do these, this here, what kind of level is that on? And how's that relate to principles? And do you have those sorts of principles?
Yeah, so, I mean, in essence, I think, these four shifts are kind of in a way what we need to experiment with. We need to experiment with different ways of dealing with people, different ways of thinking about purpose, different paradigms, different practices. But the principles then help us evaluate whether those experiments are going in the right direction, I think. As I say, I think there are sort of different ways of coming up with those principles. These healthy systems ones are the ones that I'm kind of quite like because they feel quite scientifically derived and they seem to be very general, as in they're kind of very widely applicable. So just to give you a couple of examples of them, healthy systems tend to circulate resources to all parts of the system. This is not surprising. If you think of our human bodies, we have 37 trillion cells. That's just our own cells, not counting all the other bacteria and so on that are in there. And our body makes sure that every single one of those cells has its own little blood supply. If you think about it, that is absolutely mind-blowing. The amount of effort that your body goes to ensure that every part of the system has the resources it needs. It doesn't just go, well, you know what, I'm just going to kind of supply the top 20% of cells with blood and then the rest is trickle down. So it's not what our body does. If you then start thinking about, well, how do I design it into organizations or economies or whatever, you can think about it in lots of different ways. And in an organization, it might be, well, what are the salary discrepancies? If the salaries at the bottom of the organization are so low that the resources are not being circulated sufficiently, that is not going to be healthy. And the same applies to inequality in a country. I can also think about it geographically in a country, of course. If I have certain areas, and we do have, funders call them cold spots, where there is there's no private investment going in, there is no public investment going in, there is little philanthropic money going in, that is a clear problem. And of course, if that happens in our bodies, if a cell gets cut off from blood supply, it dies. Gangrene is a form of that, by the way. And interestingly, it doesn't just die, it also infects the other cells around about it. So it actually becomes something that spreads. And again, just thinking about that in our kind of societal, economic kind of context is interesting. So that's just one idea of principles of health systems.
I found this principle really fascinating. I'd love to dig into that more sometime, but that gets the question.
Thank you for the talk. And I'm looking for more from creative practices point of view. And actually what you said about experimentation based on trust is a very core of this creative approach. And my whole career was a lot about trying to convince business people about the value of it. And I'm actually really enjoying how you are finding the language, maybe that resonates more for that perspective. But my question is, I think in the core, fundamentals of business lies certain rules like the growth and profit until now that prevented the decision makers to adopt some of these practices or, trust-based experimentation just because they're, in a way, even though they would believe these things as a human values, the business's values were something different and they didn't feel to mix their personal values with the purpose of that organization. And how do you get over that when it comes to a transformative agenda? I think we need to unlock these personal values to be applied in a organizational decision making, which is still actually separate right now.
Yeah, I completely agree. So people, feel constrained or are constrained by the kind of, what actually is valued in an organizational and commercial, especially context, which in turn is, of course, dictated by the kind of economy around about and the fact that we have markets that prioritize growth and all those kind of things. But, when I say we need to experiment with values, that means all those values. The values of the market, the values of these organizations, they're not somehow separate from us. You know, they are some kind of aggregation of all the values that we hold collectively. We have a choice, we have an agency in changing those values. And one of the ways that I think is quite powerful to make it clear to people that you can do business with different values is to find these examples like Circuit de Patron. Another example, for example, is a furniture company called Vitsu. If you've heard about that, VITSOE, it's quite a high-end designer furniture company. Been going since 1959, sells globally, very successful. You know, it genuinely goes to really long lengths to sell you less furniture. It's profoundly, you know, kind of, you said to any business person, you know, we are primed to build in obsolescence. We want to have repeat custom. We want to have customer loyalty. Come back and buy more and more and more. They get quite a lot of effort to prevent you doing that. They want to sell you furniture, so don't get me wrong. They need to sell lots of furniture to be a successful business. But once you've bought their furniture, they will kind of go to quite some lengths to try and not buy too much. They will make sure that their furniture has no obsolescence built in, that it is repairable. They use no glue, no welding. If anything breaks, you can just take out a piece and repair it. Their furniture is backwards compatible to 1959 when they started. You talk to design, I can go, why that makes sense. You talk to designers, no, you know, you've got to appreciate that it's a really, really, really big deal to have furniture that still works. They do shelving systems. So your shelf in your 1959 shelving unit breaks today, you can go to the shop, buy a new shelf, it'll fit. Because they don't want you to have to buy a whole new system, they just want you to replace the shelf. If you move house, they will actually come and take down shelves, spruce them up a bit, and put them up in your new house, because they don't want you to throw them away just because you're moving house and buying new set of shelves. They want you to carry on using them. That, I think that kind of example can help set us all free from the idea that we need to, for example, maximize growth. They are very consciously, deliberately not maximizing their growth. And yet they are still being perfectly successful, you know, have a great brand, sell globally, and all the rest. So showing these examples, these experiments, which are already all around us, and making them much more apparent to people, I think can help us, to be honest, kind of break the stranglehold that we have that, oh, but surely, you know, it's all about growth, and it has to be about growth because, you know, that's what's at the bottom. It doesn't have to be at the bottom. We can do it differently. Even within the current system, we can do it differently. Imagine what we can do once we all collectively start shifting to a different set of values as well.
So just on that point, on that organisation that's acting differently, where does that come from? That comes from just having the right values and being able to express them in the right ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is why the work we do it on purpose is about individuals and trying to develop leaders or develop people, because I think ultimately it comes down to people. Vitsu was founded by a legendary German designer called Dieter Rams, who did a lot of design for Braun, you know, shavers and other stuff. And he had like 9 or 10 design principles, and many of which were just about, you know, design should be simple because you should understand how it works. But a lot of them were, even back in the 1950s, actually very sustainable. And so it was kind of inbuilt into the company through that person, and then it's been carried on by the people who I guess both run it, but also it's not just about leadership, by the whole company clearly that make it up. So, and whenever I've seen these kind of countercultural things, you can talk about interface, for example, and Ray Anderson, the chairman, the historian, these carpet tiles are probably from interface. They make carpet tiles. And he talks about literally a kind of almost a religious conversion experience that he went through when he read Paul Hawkins' book, The Ecology of Commerce. And so, at least practically in all examples that I find, if you dig long enough, you find that actually it's a person at the end who decided this is the right thing to do. This is what I want to do. And yeah, sure, maybe I need to kind of fabricate a business case around it because I work in the real world and that's what other people will judge it on. But I'm actually doing it because I think it's the right thing. And that's where I think the values come about and why we try and develop leaders who will have those different values. Now, it's not easy to then try and make those happen. If you're in a big organization, you do have an incumbent system and it's not going to be aligned with what you're trying to do and so on. But change can happen. And especially if we start highlighting where the change has already happened, because that just builds the credibility of the idea that actually we can do things differently. And I believe so many of us, even if you go and talk to people who've never heard about systems thinking or whatever, in very mainstream jobs, so many people have such a thirst for something different. They know that something is profoundly wrong. They want to do something profoundly different. They don't know how, or they don't believe it's possible. They think that the values that they have grown up with, consciously or unconsciously in many cases, this is how it works. Showing them that actually there are other ways they can work is profoundly liberating.
I think it's the kind of structure too, which I think what this lady is referring to. How does the organisation actually integrate? So the structure being kind of constraining them, how does it enable them? I'm not sure how much you talk about structure in your model there, but Mariana, did you have that?
Yes, and my comment, many thanks for the presentation. My comment was related to that, to structure, because I wonder if there is not a hierarchy of purposes. And for example, I don't know very well Sequilla Patron, but if I see how they use benefits, profits, the profits for them is a means and not an end, right? They distribute it for purpose, it's not their end. And that's, since profit is a means and not an end, then they can have a purpose and live to that purpose because their structure allows them to. So I was wondering if this idea of profit as a means rather than as an end is something that you find in the organizations that have a purpose that goes beyond themselves, and whether you could consider that to be a characteristic of a healthy system.
Yeah, completely. I mean, we talk about purpose, or I talk about purpose, organizational purpose having to be about contributing to the health of the wider systems. Health in the example, in the ways that we just talked about, is kind of how do healthy systems behave, and then kind of thinking, okay, what systems am I part of as an organization? I'm part of a bunch of communities, I'm part of an industry, I'm part of an economy, a country, and ultimately, of course, I'm part of the natural world. So, what is my role in contributing to the health of all these different systems I'm part of? Again, if I go back to the body analogy, my cells are not sitting there going, oh, how do I grow as fast as possible? If a human cell grows as fast as possible, we have a name for that, it's cancer. Yeah? Then most of the organizations are in the economy behave in cancerous ways. But our bodies are very complex systems, 37 trillion cells in them. Somehow, and we don't fully understand how, but somehow each cell knows, what it needs to do to contribute to health, to keep us healthy. That's what it does. So I think in a kind of positive way, what it says is the purpose of that cell. So how can we take some of that thinking and say, okay, what organizations, each organization, what would it take for you to think about how do I play my part in all the different systems that I'm in? And I think, in many ways, that is what Sequilla Patron is saying. Well, if I'm part of the food system, I need the farmers to be healthy. I need them to be able to earn a sustainable living. I need the consumers to have affordable products that are not, we're not talking Whole Foods. They sell this stuff in mainstream supermarkets. It's got to be accessible to or Vitsu. How do I genuinely do my bit and use over the lifetime of the stuff that I sell as little resource as possible? That's where the really interesting thing comes in. And yeah, profit is a sideshow. Okay, I need to breathe to live. I don't live to breathe. Companies organizations need to make profits. I can make that in lots of ways. By the way, I need to make a profit whether I'm a charity, a public sector organization, or a company. They all need to make a profit, otherwise you go bankrupt. Even you are a charity. It's just, what am I making that for? Or insert, what is my bigger purpose? How am I contributing to the health of the systems I'm part of, which is the much more useful and interesting question to be asking yourself.
Yeah, I think it's a question of investments and regeneration, isn't it? Like, obviously, a healthy
Yeah.
system is a regenerative one, and to get regenerative, you have to invest. Then you're taking a profit out, and someone else you're continuously investing in the future. Really quick question, if you have one.
Yeah, it wasn't a real question, it was just a follow-up from what you were saying.
Please.
Everybody needs to make a profit. I don't like those profits so much as surplus.
Sure.
But then if you query the surplus, why do you need to have a surplus? What do you want to do with the surplus?
And how big does that surplus need to be? I mean, it may
Yeah.
just be £1.
Because if it is a surplus, then it means it's not something that's being
Surplus to
used.
require.
Yeah, absolutely.
Everybody in revenue. So it's the same stuff. Is there a good question then?
Yeah, it's really fascinating. So I'm the charity sector. So from Medicine goes the infrastructure project for all of the charities and volunteering organisations and everything. So it's been really interesting to hear that. And I was kind of a little bit alarmed earlier when it's like, oh, there is no need, shouldn't talk about purpose, because to me it's like, I think that's why that's the similar sort of conversation happening in the charity world as well. Sometimes organisations come to us and say, oh, we need to prove our impact for funders. But no, you don't do that. You've been set up for a purpose, so we can demonstrate the level of which you are meeting that purpose. So we need that period of change, for example, just to map it out. But it's just mind shift as well, because charities, similar to businesses, they're like, we need to find money, and in order to find that money, we need to show we are profitable, so we're making a difference. And it's really hard to shift that mind when the resources are scarce. But keeping it still there, reminding yourself like why you're here, go back to your mission, what you're here for. So we need to focus on that. So even for charities, it's hard. So I can just imagine how much harder it is for business, because it's sort of something that sits on one side. It's like a nice to have sort of thing. So that's how organisations should exist. If you think about, as you said, when any organisation, any business was set up for a purpose initially.
Yes. Maybe that's a good question.
Yeah, I think it is. Yeah, well done. Thanks very much.
Upstairs to the next level where all the food is and the lovely terrace up there, sunshine, so about an hour's break and then back. Thank you very much.
Sorry about that.
Hello.